Hey guys, so we have one more Aksis Theorycraft left in the bank, and that is involving a Viking Funeral Touch of Flame Sunsinger Warlock build. Some people have been asking what is better against Aksis, to spam grenades with Radiance or to just snipe and use your sword, and today we're going to briefly go over the results of my findings. So as a baseline test, I wanted to see how well grenades did against Dark Drinker, since Dark Drinker is what everyone is using and is the strongest. We are at 400 light with a 400 Dark Drinker against hard mode Aksis. 14 spins with no buffs gets us 455,000 damage. Pretty good. Now if we just throw grenades, grenade damage only at tier 5 discipline, same conditions, 244,000 damage. If we throw on Heart of the Praxic Fire and get a couple more grenades, we can crank that up to 304,000 damage, and I will be using Heart of the Praxic Fire for the rest of these tests. Now, if we throw all of our grenades and then immediately start doing sword damage, we can break 500,000 damage. I got 467,000 damage on one attempt and slightly over 500,000 on another. A major thing to note before going forward is that in a lot of these tests, the burning effect of these grenades and the debuff that is supposed to come from this build simply did not proc until about halfway through my Radiance. For whatever reason, I'm sure someone in the comments is going to tell me something really stupid that I messed up, the first half of my Radiance, of my first Radiance, did not benefit from the bonus damage of Viking Funeral, so we technically should be doing more damage than we are. Regardless of this fact, it should not impact the results in a significant way. All of that was unbuffed, so you might think, oh, hey, grenades and sword, it's better. Well, let's simulate some buffs, like Weapons of Light. If we throw Weapons of Light into the mix, our 455,000 damage sword control test is now about 614,000 damage. To simulate the damage of the grenade spam and sword swings, we need to split the two and only apply Weapons of Light to the sword. We got 5 spins in with the sword, 2 of those having some form of debuff on the boss, and then 3 of them were normal. So we ended up with 163,700 sword damage, which means we did 304,000 grenade damage, which is accurate. 163,700 damage times 1.35 for Weapons of Light is about 221,000 damage, plus the 304,000 grenade damage, which in total is about 525,000 damage, which does not beat Weapons of Light buffed pure sword damage. However, we need to take into account the fact that there are 5 other people on your team swording away at the boss at the same time, which means you're buffing their damage by about 10 to 15% for almost the entire time. So we can do about 75 to 100,000 less personal damage in order to buff our team's damage by about 10 to 15%. Is that worth it? Well, we said that if you just have Weapons of Light, you're going to do about 614,000 damage in 14 spins. Multiply by 5 for the other 5 people in the team, that's 3,070,000 damage. So that 3 million damage multiplied by 10 to 15% is boosted to about 3.3 to 3.5 million damage, which is a couple 100,000 damage more over not having that debuff. We don't have the debuff for the entire time though, we'll say about 10 out of 14 swings, so it's actually a little bit less than that. And remember, Viking Funeral does stack with Melting Point or Shadow Shot, so this wouldn't be taking the place of either of those debuffs. So, for our third teleport damage test, assuming you can immediately contribute sword damage right after grenade spam, and your team has Weapons of Light, it is beneficial to have a Sunsinger spamming fusion grenades onto the boss. Is it game-breaking damage? Absolutely not. But if you see someone spamming grenades on Aksis while everyone is spinning, know that they are, at most, boosting your team's damage, and at the least, providing about the same damage as they normally would. So how about the first 2 teleports? How is the damage there? To test this, I used a 400 Ex Machina sniper, since I think at this point, most people are using Dark Drinker, and therefore not using Black Spindle. I was able to get in 14 sniper shots on Aksis in the first 2 teleports. I'm sure you can get in 15, so we'll just call it 15 to make it an empty inventory. I did have to stun Aksis on the first teleport in one test, but I was fast enough that I don't think it really impacted my damage. Each shot is doing 20,678 damage on a crit, so we're looking at 310,710 damage total for 15 shots, no weapons of light. We add in our sword control test of 455,000 damage, and we're looking at about 765,000 total damage. One of my personal tests gave just under 700,000 damage, but I missed some snipes and I only fired 14 shots, so it's pretty accurate. If we had weapons of light the entire time for this test, that 765,000 damage turns into just over 1 million damage. Now we'll look at grenade spam. To try to manually calculate the damage from the grenade spam is an exercise in insanity, so we're just going to be using the final screen, and we end up with just over 1 million damage. To get that damage, I used Radiance on every single teleport, and did not have to worry about stunning Aksis ever. I also used my sword when I had no more Radiance in the 3rd teleport. Note that you should activate Radiance before Aksis teleports the first time to ensure that you are out of Radiance for when he teleports next, so that you can get supercharged for the 2nd teleport. You should very easily have your super before the damage phase even starts, which is why we aren't really utilizing that first supercharge. We're only 20,000 damage short of the previous test, but the previous test assumes perfection and assumes you have weapons of light the entire time. We did over 1 million damage without weapons of light, and had a significantly easier time doing it since grenades don't really need as much precision as a sniper. Not only that, but we were also buffing the damage of our team almost the entire time by another, we'll just say 10% to make it simple. More damage than sniping, you're buffing the team, and it's easier to do. Is it game-breakingly good? Again, not really, but if you see someone spamming grenades, they're helping. So, those are the results of my testing. One major thing missing from this test was the use of Shadow Shot and or Melting Point. The reason these were not included is because of the variance involved with them. You might have 2 Shadow Shots that you can spam back to back on every teleport. You might only have 1. You might have 0. You might have a Titan who can do Melting Point. You might not. To try to manually calculate all the different simulations with these buffs and debuffs and their effects on grenade spam versus sniper versus sword damage is just not really worth the time, especially since it's not really going to be game breaking in any way. If you're good enough, you're going to down Aksis in 2 cycles. This advice might help your team get from a 4 to a 3 cycle or a 3 to a 2, but not from a 2 to a 1. Another limitation of this build on Aksis is its reliance on the supercharge mechanic. If you can get the supercharge all 3 times, then this damage method will prove to be fruitful. If you can't, then it becomes less effective for every supercharge that you miss. Something beneficial about this damage build, though, is that you don't need to sacrifice anything. You don't need to swap to a different weapon or set of weapons. You don't even need to swap off of Fireborn if you don't want to. It's all ability based, meaning you get to keep the same weapon loadout, and if something does happen to go wrong, which will typically be you not getting your super, you can just go back to your normal routine and not really lose anything. So there we have it. Fusion grenade spam on Aksis is actually beneficial to you and your team under the right conditions. Add in Shadow Shots and Melting Point to get even more damage as usual. If you enjoyed this video, a positive rating would be appreciated. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.